Hey, welcome to my podcast where I discuss the origins of all sorts of things. I'm your host, Danny Payne, and this is On the Origin of Everything. Today I'm covering the origins of NBA team names. Why? Because I love basketball, but also because I'd always wondered where some of these weird names come from, like the Lakers, the Nuggets, the Jazz, the Knicks. There are quite a few surprises and some great stories, so even if you're not the least bit interested in NBA basketball, this episode is still for you. Let's get started. About a third of the NBA team names were picked by sending out a survey to let fans make suggestions. Then the team owners made a final decision based on those votes. I've left those teams out completely because that's lame. I want to start with the New York Knicks. I think they have the strangest name of all. They were originally the Knickerbockers. What in the world is a Knickerbocker? Unless you're familiar with this story, there's no way you would guess that Washington Irving was responsible. Author best known for Sleepy Hollow and Rip Van Winkle, Washington Irving wrote his satirical A History of New York in 1809 about a fictional historian named Diedrich Knickerbocker. But before its release, Irving created a buzz by placing a series of missing person ads in the paper seeking information on a Dutch historian, one Diedrich Knickerbocker, who had gone missing from his hotel. This fake story got people talking. Even the city officials posted a reward for the safe return of this historian that wasn't even real. Irving then posted a notice acting as the hotel's ownership, stating that if Mr. Knickerbocker didn't return to pay his bill, they would publish the manuscript he left behind as some sort of threat. So after Irving had the whole city following this bogus story, he released his book under the pseudonym Diedrich Knickerbocker. Eventually everyone learned that it was all a hoax, but not after buying the book, which did very well, and it launched his career. This book was so influential that New Yorkers began to be referred to as Knickerbockers. A Knickerbocker is a New Yorker. 100 years later, when the city was looking to name their basketball team, this was a great historic choice. The Boston Celtics. Boston has a large Irish population, so there's no mystery as to why they went with that name. But why are they pronouncing it with an S sound, not a K sound? Isn't it Celtics? The Celts? I speculated that it was just an embarrassing American mispronunciation. But then I saw that there's a soccer team in Glasgow called the Celtic FC. Same pronunciation. So if it's not an American mispronunciation, then what is it? What's going on here? Well, it started out as Celtics. It was Celtic in the Greek and the Latin pronunciation. But then the French got a hold of the word in the 18th century and pronounced it Celtic. That pronunciation got picked up in the English language in Scotland, England, and Ireland, and just stayed that way. It's only recently that language historians started using Celtic as a distinction between the collection of tribes that originated in ancient Europe around 540 BCE and the sports teams. Many believe that the Celts are the ancestors of the Irish, and since a handful of Celtic languages are still spoken in Ireland, most people are cool with associating the Celts with the Irish, and that's why the city with a high concentration of Irish descendants chose to name their basketball team the Boston Celtics. The Indiana Pacers. I figured this had something to do with racing, like pace cars in the Indy 500. And that's true, but the team was also named after Indiana's history with harness racing pacers. This is a type of horse racing where a single horse pulls a single driver on a two-wheeled cart in a trot race or pace race. If you didn't know already, this is what Nikola Jokic does in the off-season in Serbia. Maybe someday he'll get traded to Indiana. I was very surprised to learn that such a sport existed in Indiana. It seems very European to me. But apparently harness racing is a global sport, and it's ancient too. It dates back to chariot racing in 7th century BCE Greece, and even earlier if we're counting this use of horse-pulling carts for war instead of sport. Ancient stuff. So, the Pacers are named after pace cars and harness racing pacers. The Chicago Bulls. It had never occurred to me how birds, cats, and other wild animals are so popular when choosing mascots and team names, but hardly ever a bull. I can't think of another Bulls team besides the Chicago Bulls. What does Chicago have to do with bulls? Well, Chicago was the largest meatpacking center in the country from the Civil War until the 1920s, and if you listen to the episode on cowboys, You'll recall that cattle herding was a big industry that served to supply the nation with beef, using the Transcontinental Railroad to transport cattle across the country, and Chicago was a major hub for meatpacking. The owner of the team wanted to go with something related to that important history. He was thinking maybe the Matadors or the Toreadors, and when he was throwing around name ideas with his family, his youngest interjected that all of those ideas were a bunch of bull. And eureka! Bulls it is. Or so the story goes. The Atlanta Hawks. I didn't expect there to be a story here, but they were originally the Black Hawks, after the war chief of the Sauk tribe, Black Hawk. This was not in Atlanta yet. That team was in the Tri-City of Moline, Illinois, Rock Island, Illinois, and Davenport, Iowa. The team got relocated a couple of times in other cities before landing in Atlanta, and along the way, the name got shortened to just Hawks. Let's go out west for a little bit. The LA Clippers. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I didn't know what a clipper was, but I can't be the only one, so I included it. The first thing to know is that the team was originally located in San Diego, where there were sailing ships that passed through the San Diego Bay. A clipper is a type of mid-19th century merchant sailing vessel, designed for speed. Actual clippers weren't around anymore when they named the team in 1978, but that's what people still called all the sailboats in the area. Clippers. When the team moved to LA, they kept the name. The other team in LA is curiously named the Lakers. Why? Well, the team came from Minneapolis, Minnesota, the state with the nickname the Land of 10,000 Lakes. When the team moved to LA, they kept the name. I had to go looking to see if the term Laker had ever been used prior to naming this team, and I was surprised to find out that the term Laker has been around at least 300 years. It's been used to refer to people or things related in various ways to lakes. Tourists visiting a popular lake have been called Lakers. Boats on the Great Lakes were called Lakers. People whose work is on lakes were Lakers. Good to know, because I was imagining the team owner thinking like, let's see, we're known for our many lakes, so the lakes? Lakeys? Lakers? The Lakers. I was thinking it'd be funny if another team did this too, like, ladies and gentlemen, the Denver Mountaineers. Alright, let's move on to the Jazz. Why is a team in Utah called the Jazz? Well, the team came from New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz. And they kept the name when you know the story by now. Well, I'm going to pause here for just a second to say that Jazz is such a lame name for a competitive professional team of any kind, no matter what city or state they represent. The New Orleans Jazz makes more sense, but it's still such a wimpy name for a team. If you're looking at your upcoming matchups, like, we got the Thunder on Monday, then the Raptors on Wednesday, the Wolves on Friday, and the Jazz on Sunday. How cute. Reminds me of jazz hands. Not very intimidating is all I'm saying. Other teams have grizzly bears on their jerseys, a wolf. The Jazz have little music notes. Sorry, Jazz fans. The Houston Rockets. This seems pretty straightforward. Houston, NASA, Rockets. Except that the team actually came from San Diego. And they kept the name when they moved, But it's got nothing to do with NASA. Not originally, anyway. The San Diego Rockets team was named after the nearby aerospace industry in San Diego, not Houston. Of course, there was no reason to change the name when the team moved. The Detroit Pistons have a similar story. They also seem to have the perfect name for being in Motor City, but the team was originally in Fort Wayne, Indiana. They were named the Fort Wayne Zollner Pistons, after a piston factory owned by the team owner Frank Zollner, so the Zollner Pistons. That's too on the nose for me. The name of the team was the same name of the factory? It'd be like the Michelin Tires basketball team. I don't know. It's not very imaginative. But anyway, when the team moved to Detroit, there wasn't really any reason to change the name as it fit perfectly with Detroit's rich history in the automotive industry. The Denver Nuggets. It's not chicken nuggets they're named after, but the team does have a partnership with Wendy's where fans can get a free 6-piece if a Nuggets player gets a double-double in a home game. But anyway, Nuggets of course refers to gold nuggets. from the town's beginnings as a mining boomtown in the mid to late 1800s. The Memphis Grizzlies. What do grizzly bears have to do with Memphis, Tennessee? Grizzlies basically don't exist outside the Northwest. Well, this is another case of team relocation. I had forgotten that the Memphis Grizzlies used to be the Vancouver Grizzlies of Vancouver, Canada. There's a Vancouver, Washington too, by the way. That Vancouver team was almost called the Mounties, but they ultimately went with Grizzlies, and when the team was sold to Memphis, they wanted to change the name to something more representative of Memphis, but fans really liked the name, so they kept it. The New Orleans Pelicans. I had also forgotten that the Pelicans used to be the Charlotte Hornets. They moved the team to New Orleans, kept the Hornets name, then eventually changed it to the Pelicans. In case you didn't know, a pelican is a large bird with a gross throat pouch. I don't know how else to describe it. The franchise owner at the time said he chose the pelican because it was a symbol of resilience and determination to fight and overcome and be a sort of constant among all the destruction that occurred there from Hurricane Katrina. I like the name a lot more after reading that. The Portland Trail Blazers. Named after Lewis and Clark and the Oregon Trail. Nothing much more to say about that. But I wondered what their mascot was. It used to be a cat, but now it's a Sasquatch. And I was really hoping it was just a guy in a blazer. The Seattle Sonics. They're no longer a team in Seattle, but I wanted to include them anyway. Hopefully Seattle will get their team back soon. The Sonics are really the Supersonics, named after the Boeing supersonic transport from the 1960s that was intended to compete with the Concorde, though it never came to fruition. If you follow the NBA at all, you know that the Sonics got moved to Oklahoma City, where they changed their name to the Thunder. They have a lot of thunderstorms out there, they're in Tornado Alley, makes sense. The Toronto Raptors. They were named the Raptors by popular vote. Fans chose it because it was 1993 and Jurassic Park had just come out. I'm not even kidding. I was hoping to find some story about raptor fossils having been found in Ontario, but nope. Raptors never even lived in North America. It's crazy to think that Michael Crichton's book eventually led to Toronto naming their basketball team the Raptors. And my last pick, the Philadelphia 76ers. Of course, they're named after the signing of the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia in 1776. That one's super obvious, but since this is basically a history podcast, how could I leave it out? That's it for part 1. Stick around for part 2 right after this. This episode is brought to you by Nothing. To help keep ads off this show, consider donating by clicking the Patreon link in the show notes, or by going to patreon.com/ontheoriginofeverything. Another way you can support this show is by giving it a 5-star rating and review, or by following it, or sharing it. Let's build a community of people that are curious and always learning. Now back to the show. Part 2 is on the sport of basketball. Who cares about basketball? A lot of people. It ranks in the top 10 most popular sports in the world. The NBA alone generates over $10 billion in revenue each year. Pro basketball players have become household names. For the older generations, it was Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson. My generation was all about Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, Kobe, and Shaq. And then more presently, LeBron James, Stephen Curry, Kevin Durant, and so on. It's not just American players that have reached worldwide fame. Players from other countries have become superstars. Giannis, the Greek Freak, Cameroonian Joel Embiid, Jokic from Serbia, Luka from Slovenia. There are national leagues, international leagues, continental leagues, youth leagues, and college leagues. We got the WNBA in 1997, and let's not forget that basketball is an Olympic sport too. Every city has courts, and if you drive through any residential neighborhood in America, you'll see basketball hoops in driveways. It's impressive to see how big this sport has gotten considering its humble beginnings. Let's talk about it. The story of basketball began in the fall of 1891 in Springfield, Massachusetts, with a man named James Naismith. He was a 31-year-old graduate student who had studied theology in Montreal and was now in the International YMCA Training School, Springfield College today, studying physical education, a brand new academic discipline at the time. He studied under Superintendent Luther Gulick, the father of PE in the United States, basically. He gave Naismith the task of coming up with an indoor game for the students to play during the winter months. 2 other instructors had already tried to complete this assignment and failed. It was James Naismith's turn. He couldn't come up with just anything. It had to meet a certain criteria. It needed to be easy to learn, but complex enough to remain interesting. It needed to involve a large group of people. It needed to be playable indoors. And it needed to provide plenty of exercise without the roughness and physicality of football or rugby. He drew inspiration from other sports, the passing and the out-of-bounds concepts from rugby, the shape and size of the ball from soccer, the idea of a goal from lacrosse and hockey, and the shooting from a game he played as a kid called Duck on a Rock. As a kid in Benny's Corners, Ontario, which is somewhere between Montreal and Toronto, near Ottawa, little Jimmy Naismith played Duck on a Rock with his friends. Duck on a Rock is a really old game from the medieval era. It involves trying to knock a stone off of a bigger rock by throwing another stone at it from 15 feet away, the distance from the free throw line to the basket. Though that's only a coincidence. The original free throw line was 21 feet from the basket and was later changed to 15 feet. So this medieval rock-throwing game helped to inspire the creation of one of the world's greatest indoor sports ever? Like 1,000 years later? That's crazy. Okay, so Naismith combined all of these elements from different games to create his new game. For the goals, he asked the janitor for a couple of square baskets, but the janitor could only provide a couple of circular peach baskets. Naismith nailed one basket to the bottom rail of a balcony and nailed the other one to the bottom of the other balcony at the opposite end of the gym. The height just happened to be 10 feet, and that's why basketball hoops are all 10 feet high. There were only 13 original rules. Let's go through them real quick because it's cool to see which rules were there from the beginning and how much the game has changed since then. Rule number 1. The ball may be thrown in any direction with one or both hands. Rule number 2. The ball may be batted in any direction with one or both hands, never with the fist. I feel like the first two could have just been combined into one rule. The ball may be thrown or batted in any direction with one or both hands, but no punching it. Number 3. A player cannot run with the ball. The player must throw it from the spot on which he catches it, allowance to be made for a man who catches the ball when running at a good speed if he tries to stop. So, a few steps were allowed, which seems like a precursor to traveling rules that came later. Rule number 4. The ball must be held in or between the hands. The arms or body must not be used for holding it. Okay. Number 5. No shouldering, holding, pushing, tripping, or striking in any way the person of an opponent shall be allowed. The first infringement of this rule by any player shall count as a foul, the second shall disqualify him until the next goal is made, or, if there was evident intent to injure the person, for the whole of the game. No substitute allowed. Number 6. A foul is striking at the ball with the fist. Violation of Rules 3, 4, and such as described in Rule 5. Number 7. If either side makes 3 consecutive fouls, it shall count a goal for the opponents. Consecutive means without the opponents in the meantime making a foul. So many rules focused on fouls. Rule number 8. A goal shall be made when the ball is thrown or batted from the grounds into the basket and stays there, providing those defending the goal do not touch or disturb the goal. If the ball rests on the edges and the opponent moves the basket, it shall count as a goal. So this is the first goaltending rule. That's pretty cool. Number 9. When the ball goes out of bounds, it shall be thrown into the field of play by the person first touching it. In case of a dispute, the umpire shall throw it straight into the field. The thrower in is allowed 5 seconds. If he holds it longer, it shall go to the opponent. If any side persists in delaying the game, the umpire shall call a foul on that side. So the 5-second inbound rule and the delay of game rule were there from the beginning. Number 10. The umpire shall be judge of the men and shall note the fouls and notify the referee when 3 consecutive fouls have been made, and keep account of the goals with any other duties that are usually performed by a referee. Alright, so just outlines the duties of the officials. I didn't know there was any difference between an umpire and a referee. I didn't even know basketball had umpires. In today's game, there's a crew chief, who is the lead official, a referee, and an umpire. I thought they were all refs. Isn't this fun? Or do you have to be a total nerd to care about any of this? All right, let's finish these rules up before I lose everybody. Number 12. The time shall be 2 15-minute halves with 5 minutes rest between. Now we have 4 quarters at 12 minutes per quarter instead of 2 15-minute halves. Number 13, the final one. The side making the most goals in that time shall be declared the winner. In case of a draw, the game may, by agreement of the captains, be continued until another goal is made. So there was no overtime. It went to sudden death. Next goal wins. And those were the original 13 rules. Can you guess how many rules there are in the NBA today? 14. Just one more. Of course, I'm being coy, because even though the number is technically 14, there are 101 sections within those 14 rules, and I counted 389 sub-rules within those sections, and even more rules within those sub-rules. It still probably doesn't hold a candle to the NFL rulebook, though. Okay, so remember how the first hoops were just peach baskets? They had to have someone stationed at each basket to retrieve the ball after every made shot. Then they'd have a jump ball. A jump ball after every basket. Jump ball used to be a bigger part of the game, and I didn't know that. It must have been quite the advantage back then for your team to have the tallest guy out there winning every jump ball. Something else I didn't know is that there are fewer players on the court today than there were originally. In today's game, we have 5 players on each team out there on the court at any given time, 10 players total. But for the first game in 1891, Naismith had 3 guards, 3 forwards, and 3 centers on each team. 18 people out there. Why 18? Well, that's just how many students showed up the first day. The game was actually designed to be played by any number of students. In 1897, 5-on-5 became the standard. Here are a few more firsts for you. The first basketball was just a soccer ball, but in 1894 a bicycle company made the first basketballs, which were leather and had lacing on the outside like a football. Spalding took over a few years later. The first backboard was in 1895, and it was made of wire mesh. The original purpose of the backboard was to prevent spectators from interfering with gameplay. The wire mesh would dent easily and was replaced by wooden ones in 1904, then plate glass in 1909. The first 2-point shot was in 1896. Before that, every made basket was 1 point, and it wasn't until 1977 that the 3-point shot was introduced to the NBA. It would take 3 more years for the NCAA to adopt it. Did you notice that dribbling was not mentioned in the original 13 rules? There was no dribbling at all, until a coach at Yale in 1897 started using dribbling as a loophole to the rule that a player can't move while holding the ball. The first dribbling was more of a pass to oneself, over and over. In 1909, they changed the rules to allow continuous dribbling, which transformed the flow of the game, as you can imagine. Dribble. Dribble, 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 yeah. Why are we saying dribble and not bounce? The old definition of dribble was to let something fall in bits or pieces, and later in the context of soccer it meant to let the ball bounce. The term was appropriated to basketball, and they called it dribbling instead of bouncing. I had to get to the bottom of that, of course. The first nylon net with an open bottom didn't come along until 1912. In 1949, coaching from the sidelines was allowed for the first time. Before that, there was no coaching happening during gameplay or even timeouts. The only coaching that happened during a game was at halftime. In 1951, the NBA went to 10-minute quarters instead of the 2 15-minute halves, and in 1954 they added 2 minutes to each quarter, and it has remained that way since. Also in 1954, the shot clock was instituted. It has always been 24 seconds, so no difference there, but that also sped up the pace of the game. Without a shot clock, teams would just run out the clock if they were ahead, which is super boring to watch. I mentioned that in the event of a tie, they would just go into sudden death. Well, that didn't change until the 1960s when they introduced overtime. James Naismith invented an entire sport at age 31, a sport that is easy to learn, but challenging enough to be interesting. A sport that fostered creativity and could lend to an athletic elegance few other sports possess. A sport for the rich and a sport for the poor. A sport that came from the same place as PE and grew to fill stadiums of spectators around the world. The Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame is rightfully named after him, and the museum is located in Springfield, Massachusetts, where it all began. And that, my friends, concludes the origin story of the great sport of basketball. That's it for today. I hope you gained an appreciation for this sport, even if it's not your sport. I'm gonna go shoot some hoops. Until next time, so long. Research on this episode was done by yours truly. Music and production by Jezere Wilson. This podcast is listener-supported, owned and operated by Jez and myself under the On the Origin of Everything LLC in the United States. All rights reserved. We can be reached via email at info@ontheoriginpod.com.